Hello, and welcome to Science with Mr. Morgan. In today's episode, we're going to talk about carbon chemistry. First up, let's take a look at carbon bonding. Carbon molecules form covalent bonds, which we talked about in another episode. These compounds range from one atom to thousands of atoms. Carbon itself has 4 valence electrons, which is half of the octet rule. And when carbon atoms bond with hydrogen, it creates a substance known as hydrocarbons. These are the simplest type of carbon-based compounds, and each of them vary in size. The difference in sizes affects the melting and boiling points of the products. These hydrocarbons may be gases, liquids, or solids at room temperature, depending on which ones they are. Generally speaking, hydrocarbons are nonpolar and do not dissolve in water. Now, similar to solutions, these hydrocarbons can also be saturated. In this case, the term saturated means they only contain single bonds between carbon atoms. Alkanes are saturated hydrocarbons, but there are also unsaturated hydrocarbons, which contain at least one double or triple bond between carbon atoms. Alkenes are one type of unsaturated hydrocarbon. These have at least one double bond between carbon atoms. Aromatic hydrocarbons are another type of unsaturated hydrocarbon, and these are cyclic with alternating single and double bonds between carbon atoms. Alkynes are the last type of unsaturated hydrocarbon that we're going to talk about today. Alkynes have at least one triple bond between carbon atoms. These can form single, double, or triple covalent bonds with other carbon atoms as well. Now, as we've talked about before, molecules can combine to form various size chains, and one such chain is known as a polymer. These are large molecules made up of many smaller repeating molecules, which are joined together by covalent bonds. You might be asking yourself, what are the smaller repeating molecules in polymers called? Well, to answer your question, these are known as monomers. Sometimes polymers can occur naturally, and examples of these include rubber and cellulose. Sometimes, however, polymers are synthetic or man-made, and examples of these include plastics like polyethylene. Sometimes, carbon can also form crystalline structures. There are various common different forms which are known as allotropes, and these allotropes include common things such as diamonds and graphite. In diamonds, each carbon is bonded to 4 other carbons. This creates a very rigid structure that makes diamonds very hard. In graphite, aka pencil lead, each carbon is bonded to 3 other carbons to form layers that are weakly bonded together. This weak bonding causes it to be soft and slippery, which is what allows pencil lead to leave marks on paper. Now, besides allotropes, there are also isomers. But what is an isomer? Isomers are different compounds that are formed by hydrocarbons with the same number of atoms but different shapes. These are hydrocarbons with 4 or more carbon atoms. Now, the more carbon atoms there are, the greater number of isomers that compound can have. Again, these are different compounds with different properties like different boiling points and different melting points. They're different. Carbon chemistry also deals with different biochemical compounds. And these are carbon-based compounds found in living things like us. All of these contain hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon atoms. Now, they may also contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and/or sulfur. Almost all of these biochemical compounds are polymers, and most are macromolecules. Macromolecules are very large. So large, in fact, that some of these contain thousands of monomers. Remember, monomers are the building blocks of polymers. All biochemical compounds can be grouped into 4 classes, and these classes are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates are biochemical compounds that include sugars, starches, and cellulose. These contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they're mainly used for energy by living things. They're sugars. Simple carbohydrates like glucose are what our cells use for energy. Starches are complex carbohydrates like polymers of glucose. And plants use these to store energy. The consumers eat the plants. We break down starches to sugar for energy. Cellulose is also a complex carbohydrate, and it's another polymer of glucose. Now, this is the most abundant biochemical compound, and it makes up cell walls of plants and provides fiber in our diets. Next up are proteins. Proteins contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur. These are made from one or more long chains of amino acids, and they're linked together with covalent bonds. Multiple chains of protein are held together by weaker bonds. Proteins are the most numerous and diverse biochemical compounds, and they have many different functions. For example, there are enzymes. Enzymes act as catalysts, which, remember, speed up reactions, and in this case, biochemical reactions. In a living cell, biochemical reactions would occur too slow to support life without enzymes. These reduce the amount of activation energy needed for reactants to start reacting. And there are more than 1,000 different enzymes for human life to occur, many of which help digest food, such as amylase and pepsin. Now, it's important to note with enzymes, most enzymes end in ASE. Pepsin is a specific example that doesn't, but amylase does. And a lot of enzymes end in that ASE. All right, on to lipids. Living things use lipids to store energy. They're fats and oils, and these consist of long chains, aka fatty acids, which may be saturated or unsaturated. Now, phospholipids contain phosphorus, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it forms the phospholipid bilayer, which are two layers of phospholipid molecules that make up the cell membranes of living things, which we'll spend more time in a future episode talking about. On to nucleic acids. These include RNA, ribonucleic acid, and DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. These consist of small chains of molecules called nucleotides that are held together by covalent bonds. Now, there's RNA, ribonucleic acid, that's made of a nucleotide chain. These are copies of the genetic code in DNA, and they help synthesize proteins based on the code. Then there's DNA, which is made up of two nucleotide chains held together by hydrogen bonds in the shape of a double helix. And it contains the genetic code that tells cells how to make proteins. If you've ever seen a spiral staircase, that is similar to what a double helix looks like, but it'd be only half. There'd be two spiral staircases together that would form that shape. All right, next up, biochemical reactions. These are chemical reactions that take place inside living things. And there are thousands of biochemical reactions continuously taking place inside each cell. Metabolism is the sum of all of these biochemical reactions. And you have different types. One type are catabolic reactions. In catabolic reactions, the bonds are broken and release energy, similar to exothermic reactions. Then there are anabolic reactions, and this is where bonds form and absorb energy, and these are more similar to endothermic reactions. One of the biggest biochemical reactions is photosynthesis. This is the process in which certain living things use energy and sunlight to synthesize glucose from carbon dioxide and water. And another byproduct is oxygen. This occurs in plants, cyanobacteria, and algae. There's also a process called cellular respiration. And this is the process in which cells of all living things break down glucose with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. It's a catabolic process that releases energy by breaking bonds in glucose, and it uses that energy to form ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, for energy within cells. Cellular respiration is similar to the opposite of photosynthesis, in a roundabout kind of way. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Until next time.